Welcome to Into Theology. I'm Wyatt Graham, and I'm joined with Ian Clary and Dr. Coleman Ford. And we're going to talk a little bit about friendship in Augustine, because Coleman's done a little bit of work on that. And it's a bit of an interlude. We're still working through Confessions, but this maybe we'll maybe look at Confessions a little bit, but really this is more of an interlude on the topic of friendship. So I think maybe to get going, Coleman, just maybe give like the 32-second version of who you are, and then we'll talk about why you like Augustine.
Yeah. Well, first off, you got to decide whether or not you can be friends with someone who calls him Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
There's your first.
I heard you say it. So how do you pronounce his name?
Oh, it's Augustine.
But you and I share the same doctoral supervisor, and I side with our doctor father on how you're supposed to. So you're
not perfect.
Rebel black.
He's not. Did you say he's not perfect?
He's a great man.
We're gonna have to shut this thing down right now.
If Dr. Haken is listening,
we love the
listening.
man. We love the man. No, but my forefather, I don't know what you want to call him. Anyways, yeah, I was reared under those who called him Augustine.
You were Jeff Bingham, right?
That's it. Yeah, I'm a Binghamite in that way. So we can get past the rightness or wrongness of Augustine or Augustine. But introduction wise, so I get to teach here at Southwestern Seminary and Texas Baptist College here in Fort Worth, Texas. Been here now for about 2 years, almost about to start my third academic year. Teach in the areas of Christian formation, fancy way to say spiritual formation, and but actually in the spring I'm going to be switching over to a humanities faculty role, and so teaching in our undergrad school basically anything broadly humanities, great books, ethics. I actually get to teach a class on friendship in the fall, so I'm super excited about that. The history and philosophy of friendship, and so this is a very fun and important topic for me. So I've been here for about 2.5 years. Got to hang out in Louisville for a few years with Wyatt, doing our PhD at Southern Seminary. But I'm from this area, grew up in North Texas, family's close to here. So this is home. It's really cool to be in the place where I grew up doing what I love to do. So I spent a number of years in pastoral ministry prior to this. And then most importantly, I'm married to my wife, Alex, who also has her doctorate from Southern. So we get to talk nerdy things. Yep. We nerd out a lot at home. Some people go like to date night restaurants. We just hang out and talk about theological anthropology, which is her thing. So
okay.
That's fun. And then we have 3 children.
Can we get her on the podcast?
Yeah. Actually, I'm
kind of switching out.
Send it over to Alex. She would love that, actually, if you want to have someone on.
Theological anthropology is kind of Augustine-ish too.
Yeah. I mean, he says a few things about it, I guess. So
one or two.
Yeah, we have 3 kids, which is great. Our eldest, Colette, then we have a son named Matthew, and then we just had a little girl named Charlotte, who they're all wonderful, and we get to have fun, and we have a good little time here in North Texas.
So I'm going to ask a question.
Hold on.
Oh no, Ian's going to ask a question.
Connections here, right?
Okay.
So we do share the same PhD supervisor.
Yes, that's true.
I actually can remember the first time meeting you. Was it at the Baltimore ETS? I remember walking into a room. You were sitting next to him, and like you had a bow tie, and I think like a green jacket. And I was like,
that sounds
dude is fashionable.
That sounds familiar. I don't know if it was a green jacket, but yes, it was probably a shade of color somewhere on the spectrum.
Something like that, yeah. Quite a fashionable guy. And then and you and I both teach at Munster Bible College in Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. Man, I loved my time there in Cork. So love what they're doing there, and that was fun. Actually now that this happened afterwards, I'm actually now officially an Irish citizen.
Are you? Oh, whoa! Because I mean, your name Coleman Ford. Come on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, St. Coleman. Anyways, I got my Irish citizenship through my grandmother, who is from Galway, and because they're so wanting people, I guess, to move back to Ireland, they're willing to extend citizenship to grandchildren. So all of our family essentially are now Irish citizens. And actually, my sister is going to be traveling there this fall to go work on a farm. just because she felt like it.
Yeah, wow.
Her and her husband. So yeah, that's fun. Yeah,
That's-
go Munster Bible College.
yeah. They're doing running a course right now. I'm jealous.
Yeah,
I've seen
that's
pictures.
great.
Oh, I just wish I was there.
Yeah.
All right, let's dig into it.
So okay, let me I'll just give you a question here. What makes maybe a general question. So why friendship? Why is it interesting? But then maybe dial it into what makes a good friend, what makes a bad friend. Like this kind of like big picture with some definitions, and we can jump into Augustine more specifically.
Oh yeah. Well, I love what J.C. Ryle has said about friendship, is that it halves our sorrows and doubles our joys.
Huh.
So I think that's a good way to summarize friendship, at least the intention of friendship, right? It's to bear burdens, and have an opportunity and an environment to grow in joy. And then, Paul Waddell, who's a Roman Catholic ethicist, has written a lot on Augustine and friendship in general. He calls friendship, in Augustine specifically, the school of Christian love. So it's this idea that for friends to gather together, especially in a Christian environment, the goal and the purpose and the hope is to grow in love in the things we know are right and true. The greatest commandment, to love the Lord our God and to love one another. And so, but yeah, I mean, that's, there's nothing new about that necessarily. But I think what's helpful in our present moment is to focus on the value of friendship, and the potential that it has for obviously spiritual growth, but also just what am I trying to say? Some things that we talk about as far as technology, or even just cultural barriers that might be there. That friendship, especially in Augustine, friendship is supposed to be the thing that breaks those things down, and it's supposed to be the thing that ultimately drives us towards one another, because even if the other person's not a Christian, we still value their created human nature, and we still would want to see them flourish. And of course, the best way to flourish is in Christ. And so, there's a whole bunch of things we can talk about, but you can see this, right? You Google, you look on Amazon, tons of books are being written about friendship from a philosophical and practical perspective. Some have been written from a Christian perspective. There's a couple out there that are probably worth mentioning, but it is definitely a need in our culture, because we are losing the value of connectivity and intimacy in the right ways, right? Because we live in a sexualized culture that automatically views one another based on sexuality rather than our humanity, right? Which sexuality is a part of that. But our culture has so elevated sexuality that, men can't have meaningful relationships because it's viewed in a certain way culturally. Men and women can't have meaningful friendships because then that's viewed, and even in the church, right? Can get sticky depending on, what people think. And so either way, this idea of friendship historically is meaningful. And I think it's also helpful. I think C.S. Lewis says something in his book on the Four Loves that, oftentimes I'm very paraphrastic here. We look back at the ancient culture and expect them to explain all of these gestures of friendship they have, rather than looking at our own culture and explaining the absence of those things.
Yeah.
And so, so there's a lot to be said there, but that's a reason why I think friendship is important right now for us to think about. It's good as both academic sort of exercise and studying and looking at friendship, but also just as a practical way of being, to cultivate friendship in our lives. And for Christians in particular, there's lots of reasons to do that, but I'll stop there. We can keep talking about it.
So how do you then see, like, even in still continuing with the broad strokes here, how did you see, with your dissertation work, Augustine's kind of usefulness? Here he is writing, way back when, in our 21st century. How does that gap get bridged?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you read the Confessions, right, you see friendship, an idea of friendship that is almost foreign even to our Christian culture today, you see, Peter Brown, the famous biographer of Augustine, says that Augustine is an imperialist with his friendships, which I think is a little too edgy or not quite true to say.
Edgy.
Yeah. But what he means by that, I think, is right in the sense that once Augustine encounters someone who's a friend, it's as if he kind of takes them into his life. And so, you see this with the unnamed friend in Confessions 4, right? This idea that he's pouring his heart out over this friend, and it's again an intimate sort of connection that is very foreign, really, to our modern culture. And I would probably say it wasn't even that foreign up to the late 19th and 20th century. It really was with the kind of modern turn and some of our kind of realities of urbanization and some other things, suburbanization, if you will, some other cultural, sociological factors that have made friendship less than the sort of ideal relationship, right? And so for Augustine, friendship is the pinnacle of relationship. Now, you can say what you want about Augustine's view of marriage. I think he had a mixed view of marriage, but even in marriage, he says, right, if a marriage is to be what it is, in his treatise on the good of marriage, friendship is the kind of basic relationship to that other relationship, that marriage relationship. And I think Augustine in particular brings out some things that we should consider in regards to just the intimacy that maybe could and should be there between friends that was common in his day. It's an late antique idea of friendship, but we've lost in a lot of ways. So yeah, when you read Friendship and Confessions, it just pops out in so many beautiful ways. And so, there's lots of things going on in Confessions. Friendship is one of them, but he says even maybe in book 9, I can't remember now, but when he's gathering with these individuals after his conversion at Cassiacum, he says, "We found our rest in you." And what does he start the very work saying in Confessions 1, right? Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. And so there's even this idea that together we find our rest in God as friends. And I think that's a pretty strong theme throughout Augustine's life.
It's interesting because we just dealt with because we were just finished book 5 in our last episode, and he talks about the wicked having no rest, which is interesting. But even in that point that you made a minute ago about the friend, what was it in book 4? That's the friend who dies, right? And then takes baptism, yes. And then Augustine's a Manichae at the time and kind of derides him for it. And do you think, well, maybe before we actually get to that question, because what I was going to ask there was, is Augustine in Confessions, is he making a kind of a critique of typical ancient views of friendship? Because I've kind of thought of that whole scene as, here's maybe a Platonic idea or an Aristotelian idea, I'm not sure, you know better than I, of what friendship is. And then he kind of, and he crafts it so beautifully, and then you kind of get drawn into his own pain at the loss of this friend, only then to have him basically say, hey, this wasn't true friendship at all anyway. True friendship actually has to be in Christ, and then point us to something beyond. And so I've sort of wondered if he is kind of leveling a bit of a critique of traditional notions of friendship up to his time there. So that was my question, but maybe we need some background first. Like, what are those ancient views of friendship, like Aristotle, the Stoics, and that sort of thing, before we can answer, what he's doing there?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, we don't have time to go into the full tradition, of course.
No.
But, you got the, as you
mentioned. I have the time. It's fine.
That's right. Okay.
Yes. Class in an hour.
Yes.
So.
He's got the beard and the time. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, to your point, Ian, I mean, yeah, there is a classical notion of friendship that Augustine has inherited, right? And he's very aware of this. I mean, he speaks to this quite plainly in his writings. I think specifically, if I want to direct listeners to a place to see this, it's his letter 258. So number 258 in his collection of letters, where he is writing to a friend, Martianus, who had recently come to faith. they'd known each other for a long time. They'd been friends prior to being a Christian, and shared a lot of the things that he talks about even in Confessions 4 with this other friend. And they're specifically reflecting, or rather Augustine specifically reflecting on the Ciceronian and the Ciceronian definition of friendship, which comes from his Laetius, which is the friendship is the agreement in things human and divine. And so Augustine reflects on that, and he basically says, if you don't have agreement in one, you can't have agreement in the other. And then Jesus jukes it, if you will, and says, who's the one that is divine and human? It's Jesus. So we have agreement in all things human and divine, and essentially in our love for Jesus Christ. And so there is this idea, that he's reflecting on the classical tradition, and then turning it on its head, sort of, right? That seems too dramatic, but essentially, right, Augustine was the first Christian to elaborate this theory of Christian friendship. Others have made this observation, of course, before, but he's doing it in the full awareness of the classic philosophical tradition, but he's also doing it under the regenerative work of the Holy Spirit as he's engaging with these people and helping to reflect upon, well, what is actually the value of friendship theologically, spiritually? Why is this the case, that we desire this sort of relationship? It's not because we're lacking something. Maybe it's actually because we're made for this in a lot of ways. And so, so he remains true to the ideal of friendship in the classical sense, but also puts it in context theologically. And so that's the value for Augustine, I think, in this conversation.
So do you think because I mean, what he'll do often with the Stoics is there's a lot of a kind of Stoic stream, I guess you could say, in Augustine overall, but then he kind of takes it up to the next level where the Stoics have all these massive failings. He kind of fills in and succeeds, especially in like his more eschatological vision. Is there like something eschatological then, do you think, for friendship for him?
Yeah, I mean, so if we want to think about like even the kind of final relationship of humanity in the eschaton, I think friendship is really that idea, and that's not necessarily Augustine. I would say that's Jesus in the Gospels, seeking to correct, when the Sadducees essentially corner him to be, to say in the resurrection, right? Will we be like this, or how will we be like? Well, Augustine's like, well, don't you know that we won't be given in marriage, but we'll be like the angels. And so the implication is there, of course, that the marital sexual relationship is not going to be the pinnacle of relationship there in the heavenly beatific vision. It's a different sort of understanding of relational connectivity, which friendship is essentially that, and building towards that in a kind of eschatological sort of way. So Ian, I don't know to your question ultimately, but I do think for Augustine, there's also this reality of, and other scholars have made this observation. Joseph Clare has done this really well when he reflects on the nature of the good, kind of philosophical understanding of the good in Augustine. He talks about this in regards to how the temporal good of friendship is a foretaste of that eternal good. So where we're going to we have a singularity, if you will, that we're experiencing now, to which we are going to further experience in this kind of unchangeable, eternal sort of way. But it's still, it's kind of a preparation, I guess, if you will, for what that will be.
Or maybe like a signpost or something.
Yeah, I like that, signpost. I'm gonna take that and use it.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask a less smart question, but it kind of connects to
all the time. I mean,
yeah, that's the normal for me. What's a circle? You see, you kind of both mentioned. So Augustine has this idea of this idea of friendship and the eschaton and so on, and then there's this marriage. Maybe he has some odd things to say. So maybe a bigger question would be, and you've mentioned a little bit, like is marriage just friendship plus, right? And then also, like, is friendship really like the end, even like an end of marriage, as it were? Because like when you're like in the new heavens and new earth,
Yeah.
you and Alex, you'll presumably be friends still. It's unclear what your marriage relationship will mean. Is it so? So maybe just generalize on that, then maybe talk a little about if you know anything about Augustine on this question, because it's just interesting to me that, because I think, you get married, really the foundation is still friendship. It's a unique kind of friendship, but it's still friendship, right? So maybe help make those things make sense.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let me just solve all of our problems here. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think so. When you say friendship plus, right? Yeah, maybe. I don't know how I would say it otherwise, but I mean, I think this goes back to even our cultural moment where we maybe need to reflect more deeply upon friendship in the Christian perspective, to where we have so heightened marriage as the ultimate relationship. And certainly there are plenty of biblical precedent to show marriage as both imaging certain things theologically, but also in the creative work of God, the complementarity of man and woman. But at the same time, we've sexualized it, right? And I'm not going to, this isn't a therapy session necessarily, but we have loaded. I don't know what my next question is going to be.
I have a lot of questions now.
Ready for this? No. I'll say from where I am standing, or sitting rather, is that we have perhaps over-sexualized marriage to where the pinnacle of marriage is, and we do this in Christian teaching, right? Sermon series and books, right? It's this experience of sex. And I'm right. I am all for the biblical view of marriage, monogamy, and the sexual expression must take place between a man and woman in marriage. That is absolutely 100% true. But what we've done is we've heightened that as the pinnacle of the marriage relationship. And then if we're not having the good sex all the time, therefore something's wrong. Where Augustine, I think, and others, and really this is I think the Christian tradition in general, even though there are some fault in some of the teaching on marriage throughout the tradition, is that the relational dynamic of marriage gets lost in that. So friendship plus, maybe, I don't know. What I would say is, as you've mentioned, friendship is the foundation for that, but that someone is not less of a person if they're not married, right? So I think that's where we have fallen into some unhelpful potholes in the evangelical tradition, is that all of a sudden marriage is, it completes a person, right? To where really that's fairly new in the Christian theological tradition from my perspective, right? This idea of marriage is this completion of a person, when really the tradition has always sought to show relationship with others generally is the completion of that, and marriage is an aspect of that,
right?
And
it's a particular kind of relationship, but because I think some people today would say something like, if your wife's not like your best friend, or if you need another friend to get something your wife can't, like, then there's some problem. But it's like, well, let's say you have 10 friends, they might all be unique and different, and it might be that you share something unique with one person that's not true of the other 9, but that's not, in my mind, a problem. It's just because of the diversity of human experience,
right?
Everyone's different and has different experience and strengths and weaknesses and so on. I kind of find that really interesting. And I do think, I mean, you mentioned a few times, it's kind of over sexualizing of everything. But even when it comes to male friendship, it's hard. You want to be like careful, there's boundaries and borders. But even like you said at the very beginning, I thought it was insightful too. It's like being sexuality versus humanity as like the baseline. And if your sexual identity, preference, expression, etc., are the main identifying features of what it means to be human, I think it actually really makes it tough to be friends with people, because you're always kind of thinking through the sexual dimensions of it rather than the humane dimensions of it. So, okay, let me ask you a question. What's friendship in heaven like?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you know?
Well, there's this one time I was there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. When I got in a car wreck. No, I think Yeah, I mean, again, what's the pictures we have? I mean, it's a few of the corrective teachings of Jesus, and also the eschatological vision we see in Revelation. But then also, I think the way in which, again, going back to the creation narrative rather, Genesis 1 and 2, the suitable helper, right? The idea that we can have some sort of relationship with the other creation, but it's not the kind of relationship that is the best for us. And so therefore, there's this idea that, again, this isn't completing us, but it is in some sense fulfilling in us what we are created to have, which is relationship with one another. So again, friendship and even marriage isn't something that comes in as a result of sin and the fall. It was there at the very beginning. Right. And so and if we believe, as I do, right, that God's creation of man was very good, then it is very good that we have relationship. And then it's also very good that we are in relationship with one another, and it's not actually a part of imperfection, right? Of course, it is now subject to imperfection because of the fall. And so we cannot experience friendship and relationship the way we ought to. And so therefore, if we're going to think about heaven, right? So I'm just kind of working this out as we talk. So excuse me, is that our relationship with one another is to the point where it is with fullest meaning and fullest intent towards the other person. And then, of course, as Augustine discusses friendship, right? What is friendship? And in general, like his idea, which comes from on-Christian teaching and kind of his sort of epistemology, or not even epistemology, but his idea of just the theory of knowledge, and well, that's epistemology, but his theory of language and other things. Why are we doing these things? It's to love God in them, right? And so why are we participating in friendship? It's not because we all agree on the same football club, which is, of course, the Tottenham Hotspurs, but it's that's right. It's because I love God in you. And so in heaven, right, in the new heavens and new earth, we are in some set, like now we're seeking to do that. And it's always going to be fraught with sin, though the Spirit is indwelling us and working these things out. In heaven, we are loving God perfectly through the other person, not to be used, not to use the other person, not to bolster our own ego or our own self-identity, whatever the case may be. So I don't have an answer, and I can't recall exactly if and how Augustine speaks of the relationship as it would be in heaven, but it is perfect in the sense that we are loving God through the other person as it was intended to be. And so that's all I'm gonna say, because then I'll probably start getting the weird murky water that will get tweeted and out of context.
That's the best part. Let me ask one more thing, then I'll hand back to Ian. You said earlier, I think you were quoting C.S. Lewis, that we often look in the past about the unique friendships, we're trying to explain them, but we never look at the present and what we're deprived of. And it's interesting, you look at Augustine, he has all these friends, and he's at one level deprived of something. He doesn't have Twitter, Facebook, he doesn't have the internet, he doesn't have all these distractions, he doesn't have a million books to read at once. He probably has dozens to read at once. Is it partly that because we have so much stuff today, we aren't freed up for the kind of friendship that Augustine has and enjoys? Because when I read him, it's like you almost wish you could have those sorts of friendships that he had, and yet it feels pretty hard to do that today. There's just too much stuff in between, in the crevices of time.
Yeah, that sounds like a young adult novel waiting to be written, Between the Crevices of Time. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. You can do with that what you want.
Copyrighted though. I
Canada will sponsor that. I don't know. But I think you're exactly right. I mean, Wyatt. So this is obviously an advantage that we have, that you're in Canada. Ian is in Canada in his heart, but in the US physically in Colorado. And I'm here in Texas, and we get to do this, and that's great, and that's lovely, and that's a beautiful thing. And so
that's 3 countries, actually.
Say what?
three countries you just mentioned: Canada, the U.S., and Texas.
That's right.
Oh, I thought
That's
you
right. The
nations.
Republic of Texas, where I currently reside.
I
and
thought I
running
was
for president.
with my own heart. That's what you were saying.
That's it.
Four then.
Yes. But yeah, this is why we do this, right? So we can have this fun in this virtual way. But I think we would all concede that this would be better were we together in a room or in a coffee shop or whatever the case may be, because we are encumbered by, and I'm no Luddite, right? Like, I'm not saying that we toss out all of our technology, but I am encumbered by the 4 different notifications I just got about a meeting I'll have after this, right? Or, checking my calendar that's, over here, that's, popping out on the screen or whatever, right? Like, so to your point, yeah, technology is supposed to make it easier for us. In a lot of ways it does. I'm really thankful for my smartphone and my GPS, but my goodness, it has contributed to, and this is nothing new, right? But contributed to the distraction that then takes our focus away from other people, other image bearers of God, and the physicality of them. It doesn't even have to be the physical presence, but just the desire to extend ourselves towards them in a meaningful way. And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, like it does make a difference, and it does bring about a more challenging environment for us to encounter friendship, and just the reality of, okay, if you have nothing else to do, let's just hang out as friends, right, and see what happens.
But that doesn't happen. Like, there's never no one. Well, I think most people who are adults, anyways, you don't just like, I'm just gonna hang out with friends all day. Like, that doesn't. There's no category that allows you to do that usually.
Yeah, but just think about it. I mean, I've been trying to formulate this in my own kind of encouragement and teaching of others. So I'll point to a recent Lifeway study that shows that one of the greatest needs that pastors have, number 5 on the list of all the needs that they identified, was friendship and fellowship with others. And so, but if you look at the other ones around it, I would argue that friendship impacts all of those. If you're growing in friendship, then you won't have as much stress in finding volunteers and leaders for your church, which is the top need. Or you won't struggle with confessing personal sin. Like, you won't have a place for that. Well, you got your friends, right? And so, all that being said is, maybe we should conceive of the work that we do, whether we're in full-time ministry, academic, we're at home with kids, whatever the case may be, as an activity of extending friendship. And so, I mean, that doesn't look good on a job description, right? Probably, or some kind of hiring committee would probably laugh at you if you said, well, my job here is just to make friends. But really, if you think about the people who were most impactful in our lives, the leaders, the pastors, they likely were people who did this in their own life, right? Who sat down and just said, I want to get to know you, or how can I help you, or invite you over to their house, right? Just the basic kind of stuff, which is the stuff of friendship. That's like friendship 101. And all the other activities, quote unquote, that we do, maybe they would be more meaningful if we were doing it with friendship in mind, big picture, whatever that looks like. But I don't know, I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm starting to really think that way. So
I totally agree with what you're saying. When I was pastoring in Toronto, the guy that I pastored with, he was the senior pastor, but we were best friends. It just did not ever feel like work. Even when we were doing hard stuff like counseling with very difficult issues, but just the fact that it was like, oh, we're 2 friends doing this together. Even the things that could be sucky, kind of, were okay,
Yes. Yeah.
And you'd come out the other end and think, oh, that was a great day, because you did it, with somebody who you're really close friends with.
Yeah, that's good.
To your previous point about the technology, Augustine is using technology, though, right? A large part of your dissertation is on letter writing and epistolary. So, here we are, in our own sovereign nations, and we're having maybe a kind of like updated version of like kind of an epistolary friendship here, but it's mediated through digital technology instead of, quill and papyrus or whatever he was writing on,
Right.
So how did then he manage that sort of distance with letter writing and cultivating, friendship from within that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great point, Ian. I mean, they were definitely not averse to the whatever was available to do that. And that's another point to make as far as Augustine's sort of testimony to friendship, that a lot of folks that he was considering as friends, he likely didn't even meet in person, right? Which contributes to even some of the language that you see in his letters. So you think about writing to Paulinus of Nola, who was in his own right is a worthy theologian and spiritual leader, right? So you can read his works. They never knew each other, right? They never met each other, rather. But when you read their letter exchange, and he's not the only example, but when you read their letter exchange, you know, they use language like when your letter was read to the brothers gathered here, it was as if you were present with us. And it's just this highly affectionate language. It's extremely charged with emotion because of the reality, I think, that they knew they would probably never see each other, but they still had affection for one another and who they were, so that the letter itself was almost as good, not quite, but almost as good as having the person there with them. And this is why, yeah, you see in antiquity letters written the way that they are, because they are a means and a vehicle for relationship with one another, friendship with one another. You know, we know even in our scriptures, right, the way that the apostles talk about their affection for the churches and the individuals that they're writing to. And some of them they would never have met. Some of them they did, of course. But yeah, I was just even thinking about here in our chapel today, we were reading in Acts, where now I'm blanking on the chapter, maybe Acts 20, where Paul is meeting with the leaders in Ephesus, and he's saying, well, you know, he's departing right from them. And it closes, the chapter closes with the beauty. I just looked at it, I was like, that's friendship, right? They're weeping over one another because they realize they're never going to see each other again. And they didn't want Paul to leave because of the relationship that they had with one another and just the intimacy that they had with one another. I had never read it that way until today. I never thought about it that way till today. And there's tons of other things that you can say about that text, but just that relational intensity that's there is extremely absent from our culture today because of, well, it's not manly to weep, right? Or it's weird that they are so affectionate towards one another. You know, what does that mean about them? You know, kind of that, you know, sort of like insinuation sort of thing. Yep. And that's tragic, man. It's so tragic. I'm not saying I practice this perfectly, but I read these things and I do these things and I realize, my goodness, we are missing so much in this. And so, yeah, back to your thing, like technology is great, but it's, yeah, we also need to understand like the just the emotional component that it can also help bridge a little bit of that divide, right, as it did with Augustine and others.
You think that you know, especially in Confessions, the way he frames his relationships, that, you know, like what you were saying before about how, you know, the Lifeway study, friendship really impacts all of these. In a way, then do you think you could see the same with the other figures that show up in the book? I mean, there's obviously Alypius, who's, you know, very important to him. Mm-hmm. Then there's his unnamed concubine. Mm-hmm. Then there's his mother, right? And then there's there's the list can go on. There's the friend that's dying.
Yeah.
He's got the bad friendships that he's stealing the pears with. So
his friendship with his mother.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like Monica, right? Is she a friend to him, even though she's his mother? And like, is that like then suffusing those other types of relationships?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, to think about the development. I mean, I wouldn't say this is the only way to read Confessions by any stretch.
Right.
But to your point, Ian, my goodness, he is the vehicle of which he is experiencing God's grace or recognizing his depravity is in the context of friendship. To your point, the stealing of the pears and just the debauchery that he experienced, and even just other specific friendships where he was not a believer yet. And yeah, and to your point of Monica, she takes pride of place in both his family, right? I mean, his dad's a passing nod,
Yep.
right? And you don't even realize he's there practically. She's obviously elevating, or he's elevating her in a certain way as an exemplar, but going into his post-conversion writings at Cassiacum, she is there participating, right? She's there as a philosophical conversation partner, and usually the one that actually has the right answer, right? Like all of these people, Alypius and others, they're waxing eloquent on things, and Augustine's still, he's kind of trying to figure these things out. And I would argue he's very Christian, but still he's a new believer in some sense, right? So, and Monica comes in and just kind of like lays it all out there, right? And so, yeah, and so to that point, I mean, there is a big dynamic, a large dynamic of friendship that is present in all of these facets. And so, and Augustine does things like the sort of contemplative experience that happens at Ostia with his mother. Right. That's a very intimate thing, in that sense, spiritually intimate, to where that experience is not a mother and a son just having a Bible study together, right? Which is great. We should do that. But it is, they were able, and the mother, the woman, contemplating Christ at such a high level.
She's really a philosopher at that point, right? Because that's not supposed to happen to women of her class. It's only supposed to happen to like the greats, like a Plotinus or a Porphyry or something.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Only the elite male can be that, right? In ancient sense. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Coleman, for your time. That was fun to talk about friendship with my friends.
Yes, isn't that fun? It's more meaningful to talk about friendship with friends, but I will do it even if that doesn't happen. So this is fun. I appreciate it. I love how that y'all have taken some time just to think through this.
Are you because your dissertation, are you going to do anything with it in terms of publication or?
Yeah, Lord willing, it'll be out on Lexham Press by the end of this year.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, so just sent off the kind of edits to that from the copy editor. Should be on track to be out by ETS time in November. So me and 3 other people will buy a copy, but
here, so
I would love that. And working on this topic in various other ways. Me and a common friend that we have, Sean Wilhite, and I are working on a book with Crossway on pastoral ministry in the early church, but we're gonna have a chapter in there on friendship, because that's a big theme with not only Augustine but Basil and the Cappadocians and others. But so just gonna sprinkle the magic friendship dust wherever I can. So
thanks, Coleman.
We'll see where it goes. Great.